My aunt burned Grandpa's original will. She didn't know the lawyer had 3 copies. The first thing I inherited from my grandfather was the smell of his will burning. It was just after midnight on the day of his funeral. Most of the family had gone home, leaving half-empty coffee cups and sympathy cards scattered across the dining room. I had returned to Rowan House because I had forgotten the small cedar box that held Grandpa Samuel's military medals. He had asked me to keep them safe years earlier, and after watching relatives carry off flower arrangements and bottles of unopened wine, I did not want to leave anything important unattended. The study door was closed, but a bright orange pulse moved beneath it. When I pushed it open, my Aunt Vivian was standing over the fireplace in her black funeral dress. She held a pair of brass tongs in one hand. In the grate, several cream-colored pages folded inward as fire consumed their edges. I recognized the blue ribbon binding and the dark green seal pressed into the bottom corner. I had seen both 14 months earlier when Grandpa asked me to drive him to Gabriel Price's law office to sign his new estate plan. Vivian turned so quickly that the tongs struck the stone hearth. For 1 second, surprise stripped the grief from her face. Then she recovered and told me Grandpa had asked her to destroy old tax papers. She spoke calmly, but she placed her shoe on a page that had fallen outside the grate. I did not argue. I took out my phone and photographed the fire, the ribbon, the tongs, and her shoe. Vivian noticed on the 4th picture. She stepped between me and the hearth, called me sick for turning a private family moment into an accusation, and ordered me out of a house she said now belonged to her. That was the first time she claimed Rowan House. By breakfast, she had claimed everything else. I stared at the messages from the guest room of a roadside motel because Vivian had changed the locks before dawn. My mother, Helen, had been Grandpa's younger daughter. She died when I was 17, and Grandpa became the person who kept the world from collapsing around me. He taught me how to drive on the orchard roads, paid for my first year of college, and never treated my interest in paper conservation as a strange hobby. When I became an archival conservator, he sent me photographs of damaged ledgers and asked what I thought had happened to them. We understood each other through objects and the stories people tried to erase from them. The claim was absurd, but it was useful. If she could make me look greedy before Grandpa died, anything I questioned afterward would seem like proof. At 8 that morning, I called Gabriel Price. His receptionist said he was already on his way to Rowan House for the formal reading scheduled at 10. Vivian had not told me there would be one. I sent him the photographs with a message explaining what I had seen. He called less than 3 minutes later. Gabriel did not waste time comforting me. He asked whether I had touched the ashes, whether Vivian knew I had photographed the fire, and whether anyone else had been in the house. His voice became quieter with each answer. Then he told me to return with a witness, secure whatever remained in the grate, and avoid confronting Vivian. I asked the question that had kept me awake since midnight. If she had burned the signed original, could she claim Grandpa had revoked it? Gabriel paused. He said destruction could create a serious dispute if the person who made the will destroyed it while intending to revoke it. But Grandpa had been dead for almost 12 hours when Vivian lit that fire. Dead men did not revoke documents. People who burned them afterward created evidence. Then he told me something Vivian did not know. Grandpa had expected trouble. The document signed in Gabriel's office had been prepared with a full preservation protocol because Grandpa owned a complicated business and had already accused someone of interfering with his records. Gabriel had a high-resolution color copy stored in his firm's secure archive. A second verified copy was held in the trust department of First County Bank. A third sealed copy had been deposited with the county clerk, along with affidavits from the witnesses who watched Grandpa sign. The original mattered, but it was not the only proof of what Grandpa wanted. At 9:30, I returned to Rowan House with Gabriel, his paralegal Nadia Chen, and a deputy from the county sheriff's office. Vivian opened the front door wearing a cream sweater and the expression of a woman welcoming guests to her own property. That expression changed when she saw the evidence bags in Nadia's hands. The fire had been cleaned. The grate was empty, the stone had been scrubbed, and the brass tongs were gone. Vivian said the housekeeper had removed the ashes without knowing they were important. There had never been a housekeeper on Sundays. The deputy photographed the hearth. Nadia found a narrow strip of blue ribbon trapped between 2 bricks. I found something even smaller beneath the edge of the rug. a charred corner of heavy paper, no larger than my thumbnail, carrying half of Grandpa's handwritten initial in green ink. Vivian watched me place it in an evidence sleeve. For the first time since I opened the study door, she looked afraid. The reading of the will took place at the dining table where Grandpa had taught me to play chess. Vivian sat at the head, as though seating herself there could settle ownership. Mark sat beside her with a leather portfolio and a look of rehearsed patience. My uncles, 2 cousins, and Grandpa's younger brother joined by video. Gabriel placed a locked case on the table, but did not open it immediately. Vivian began before he could. She announced that a will from 2009 named her as sole beneficiary and personal representative. She produced a photocopy with Grandpa's signature and said he had kept it in his desk because he trusted her to carry out his wishes. Mark passed copies around as if they were meeting agendas. The 2009 will was real, signed after my mother's death, but it did not mention the later growth of Rowan Restoration, the land trust, or Grandpa's newest accounts. More importantly, it had been expressly revoked by the document Vivian burned. Gabriel let everyone finish reading before he opened his case. He removed a certified color copy bearing a notarial verification page and placed it beside Vivian's older document. The first page stated the date in plain type, April 18th of the previous year. Every page carried Grandpa's initials. The final page showed his signature, the signatures of 2 witnesses, and Gabriel's notarized declaration. Grandpa's estate plan did not disinherit Vivian. It gave her more security than most people would ever receive. She was to have lifetime use of the renovated gatehouse, medical insurance through a funded trust, and a monthly allowance adjusted for inflation. Mark received a protected education and housing fund. Other grandchildren received smaller trusts. Personal items were assigned through a memorandum kept with the estate records. But Vivian did not receive control. Rowan House, the orchard, and 86 acres along the Greywater River were to pass into the Samuel Rowan Heritage Trust. The trust's purpose was to preserve the historic mill, protect the riverbank from development, and create a training center for traditional building trades. I was named trustee. Grandpa's voting shares in Rowan Restoration also went to the trust, while profits would support maintenance, apprenticeships, and family distributions. Vivian's expression hardened when Gabriel read my name. Mark stopped pretending to take notes. Vivian called the plan impossible. She claimed Grandpa had become confused after a minor stroke and that I had pressured him while driving him to appointments. She said he had promised her everything because she gave up her career to care for him. Several relatives avoided looking at me. They had heard versions of that story so often that repetition had begun to resemble evidence. Gabriel opened a second folder. It contained a capacity evaluation completed by a geriatric neurologist 2 days before the signing, notes from 2 private meetings where Grandpa spoke without family present, and a video record of the execution. Gabriel did not play the video at the table. He simply described it. Grandpa had explained the major provisions in his own words, identified the people he intended to benefit, and stated why he did not want Vivian controlling the land or the company. Vivian demanded to know what he had said about her. Gabriel answered that the full recording would be provided through the probate process. That restraint frightened her more than an accusation would have. The meeting ended with Gabriel announcing that he would petition the probate court to admit the later will, appoint a neutral temporary administrator, and freeze transfers until the original's destruction was investigated. Vivian argued that she was already personal representative under the old will. Gabriel reminded her that an appointment came from the court, not from a family group chat. Mark slammed his portfolio shut. He said they would hire their own attorney and prove I had manipulated a dying man. I almost responded, but Grandpa had taught me that people who depended on noise often mistook silence for surrender. I let Mark fill the room with threats while Nadia recorded the time, the witnesses, and the documents he claimed to possess. After the relatives left, Gabriel asked me to walk through the study with him. The desk drawers had been emptied. Grandpa's fireproof document box was missing, along with a red ledger that listed every family loan and business distribution. His laptop remained on the shelf, but its hard drive had been removed. A framed photograph of my mother lay face down behind the desk. Vivian had not burned a single document in panic. She had searched the room. The bank copy required joint authorization. The county copy was sealed. And Gabriel's archive scan included color references for comparing ink, paper, seal, and ribbon. Vivian could not reach any of them. Grandpa had designed the record to survive physical destruction and later claims of fabrication. There was one more protection. The will directed the temporary administrator to review every transaction made under any power of attorney during the final 3 years of Grandpa's life. Vivian had held that power for 11 months. When Gabriel said it, I remembered the new car she claimed Mark had leased for her, the kitchen renovation that began while Grandpa was in rehabilitation, and the private caregiver invoices she refused to show me. The fire in the study was no longer just about inheritance, it was about accounting. And somewhere between the ashes, the missing ledger, and the old will she had placed on the table, my aunt had revealed exactly what she feared we would find. The court appointed a retired bank officer named Evelyn Shaw as temporary administrator 48 hours later. Vivian objected through her new attorney, Calvin Reese, but the judge refused to let either side control the estate while the destroyed will and missing records were being investigated. Evelyn changed the locks again, inventoried the property, and gave me supervised access to Grandpa's papers because I could identify his filing system. Vivian told the family I had arranged to have her thrown out of her home. In reality, Evelyn allowed her to remain in the main house temporarily. She restricted access to the study, business office, and storage rooms. Vivian still had a bedroom, meals, and the use of Grandpa's car. Yet she posted a photograph of 2 suitcases in the hallway and wrote that greed had made her homeless before her father's body was cold. Evelyn began with the power of attorney records. First County Bank provided 3 years of statements. Rowan Restoration produced expense reports and payroll files. The insurance company sent copies of every reimbursement claim made for home care. The pattern was hidden beneath ordinary descriptions. There were weekly payments to Rowan Home Support, a company supposedly providing overnight caregivers. There were reimbursements for medical equipment Grandpa never used, mileage claims for appointments I had driven him to, and consulting fees paid to Mark for estate continuity planning. Each transaction was small enough to look plausible. Together, they totaled more than $412,000. Rowan Home Support had no public office, no licensed staff, and no website. Its mailing address was a rented box 2 towns away. The registered organizer was a company formation service, but the bank account receiving payments had been opened by Mark. Vivian was an authorized signer. She had not sacrificed her career to care for Grandpa. She had paid herself through a shell company while a licensed nurse did the actual work. The legitimate nurse, Lorna Bell, agreed to meet me and Evelyn at Gabriel's office. Lorna had worked weekdays from 8 until 4. She kept meticulous notes because Grandpa's insurer required them. Vivian was rarely present during those hours. On several afternoons, she returned carrying shopping bags and asked Lorna to tell relatives that she had been at the pharmacy. That was when Grandpa contacted Gabriel about revising his estate plan. The timing connected everything. He did not change his will because I whispered suggestions during car rides. He changed it after discovering that the daughter claiming to protect him had been billing him for care she did not provide. The red ledger would have contained his handwritten notes about those payments. Its absence mattered, but it was not fatal. Grandpa treated records the way some people treated family photographs. He copied important numbers into multiple systems. His accounting firm had monthly scans. The bank retained check images. Lorna had her care logs. Even the missing ledger left a rectangular dust mark on the study shelf that appeared in Evelyn's inventory photographs. Then we found the land deal. 6 months before Grandpa died, Vivian had signed an option agreement with Meridian Communities, a regional developer. For $100,000, Meridian received the right to purchase 60 acres of the orchard and riverfront if Vivian acquired authority to sell after Grandpa's death. The final price was $12 million, far more than the land's agricultural value and far less than its projected value after rezoning. Vivian had accepted the option payment through another company controlled by Mark. She had also promised to deliver clear testamentary control within 90 days of Grandpa's death. The deadline was approaching. The heritage trust in the new will made the deal impossible. It prohibited subdivision and required any sale of protected land to receive approval from an independent preservation board. The old 2009 will, however, gave Vivian the estate outright. If the new will disappeared and she gained appointment under the old one, she could complete the sale before the rest of us understood what had happened. Suddenly, the speed of her actions made sense. She changed the locks, removed the hard drive, emptied the document box, burned the original, produced the old will, and announced ownership before sunrise. She was not reacting to grief, she was racing a contract. I had the photographs, Nadia had the ribbon and charred fragment. We had witnesses who saw the later will signed, but only I had seen Vivian at the fireplace. Calvin Reese had already described me in his filing as an interested beneficiary whose account is inherently unreliable. That phrase followed me home. I knew what I had seen, yet I also knew how easily families revise a woman's anger into instability. Vivian had spent years establishing the version of me she needed: distant, ambitious, resentful, obsessed with Grandpa's property. If the case became my word against hers, some relatives would choose the story that asked least of them. Grandpa had known that too. At the end of our third day in the study, I opened a shallow map drawer that appeared empty. The felt lining was slightly raised at one corner. Beneath it lay a single index card in Grandpa's handwriting. "Elise," it began, "if records are missing, start with the mill clock." The mill clock stood in the front hall, 7 feet tall, built from oak salvaged after the original Rowan mill flooded in 1936. Grandpa had repaired its movement himself. Vivian had always hated its uneven ticking. Behind the removable lower panel, we found no money and no secret will. We found something more useful. There was a compact backup drive sealed inside a moisture-resistant archival pouch. On the label, Grandpa had written one word: receipts. The drive contained no dramatic confession. Grandpa had not recorded a speech predicting his own murder or naming a villain for future generations. What he preserved was far more consistent with the man I knew. Folders, dates, scanned invoices, bank alerts, voice notes, and photographs of documents exactly where he found them. The earliest file was 18 months old. It showed a Rowan home support invoice beside Lorna's legitimate care schedule. Grandpa had circled overlapping hours and written, "2 caregivers claimed, only 1 here." Another folder contained screenshots of checks issued after Vivian told him online banking was temporarily unavailable. A spreadsheet compared payments to Mark's company with days Mark had been traveling out of state. There were also photographs of the Meridian option agreement. Grandpa had found it in the printer tray after Vivian left for dinner. He photographed every page, including the signature block and a schedule promising vacant possession of the Orchard house. In a voice note recorded that night, he described asking Vivian about it. She said the agreement was a market appraisal and accused him of misunderstanding legal language. His voice was slower than it had been when I was a child, but there was no confusion in it. He said he knew the difference between an appraisal and an option to purchase. He also said he intended to protect Vivian from homelessness without giving her the power to sell what generations had built. That sentence explained the gatehouse provision in the new will. Even after discovering her betrayal, he tried to give her security. The final folder was named Will Safeguards. It included a photograph of the signed original inside the green fireproof box in his study, a receipt for the box, and an inventory page dated 2 weeks before his death. Grandpa had placed a narrow tamper seal across the box latch. The seal carried a serial number. In the photograph, it was unbroken. Evelyn checked the study again. The box was still missing. The drive also synchronized with a private cloud account Grandpa had created under Gabriel's guidance. That account preserved metadata showing when each file had been uploaded and whether it had been altered. The uploads ended 5 days before his death, when he entered the hospital for the last time. None of it directly showed Vivian lighting the fire, but it closed the space around her story. Grandpa had not destroyed the will. He had photographed it secured in his study. He had not asked Vivian to burn obsolete tax papers. The pages in my photographs matched the ribbon, seal, and paper in his inventory image. And Vivian had a financial reason to make the document disappear quickly. Then a message arrived from someone I did not know. His name was Owen Pike, and he maintained the orchard grounds. Vivian had dismissed him the morning after the funeral, saying the new owner would bring a landscaping crew. Owen had seen the story she posted about being forced out and contacted Evelyn because it did not match what he witnessed. 3 weeks earlier, tools had begun disappearing from the equipment shed. Owen installed 2 battery-powered wildlife cameras, one near the shed and another facing the side path between the study veranda and the old ash bins. He told Grandpa, who approved the cameras, but asked him not to confront anyone until they knew what was happening. Owen had not checked the second camera since the funeral. The memory card showed Vivian leaving the study veranda at 12:23 in the morning. She carried the green, fireproof box against her chest. At 12:41, after I had been ordered out, she returned with a metal ash bucket and a long-handled brush. Mark followed her carrying a black trash bag. They emptied the fireplace, placed the contents in the bag, and walked toward the rear service gate. At 12:58, Mark returned alone with the empty bag folded under his arm. The camera did not capture the fire inside the room, but it captured the cleanup Vivian denied and the document box she claimed not to have seen. Its clock was synchronized by satellite. Owen had retained the purchase receipt and installation records. Evelyn immediately made forensic copies of the memory card and placed the original in secure storage. So we built connections. The box serial number in the footage matched Grandpa's receipt. The ribbon matched Gabriel's office supply, and the charred fragment carried ink consistent with Grandpa's initials. My photographs preserved the fire before cleanup. The camera preserved what happened after I left. Mark's phone records placed him at Rowan House, despite his claim that he went home at 10. The black trash bag presented a different problem. Mark had carried it through the rear gate, beyond the camera's view. The property bordered a county road, 2 farms, and the river. He could have discarded the ashes anywhere. Owen knew the land better than Mark. He pointed out that the service gate opened near an old stone culvert, where workers sometimes staged waste before collection. Evelyn obtained permission for a search. Beneath wet leaves beside the culvert, investigators found a torn bag containing gray ash, metal staples, melted ribbon, and fragments of heavyweight paper. Examiners could not reconstruct full pages, but they recovered part of a notarial embossment, 2 page numbers, and the words, Samuel Rowan Heritage. The paper and ink were consistent with Gabriel's preserved samples. When Vivian learned about the bag, she changed her story. She no longer denied cleaning the fireplace. Through Calvin, she said she had burned the later will because Grandpa instructed her to do so during his final hospital stay. According to her, he regretted allowing me to manipulate him and wanted the 2009 document restored. The claim created the very question she hoped it would answer. If Grandpa wanted to revoke the later will, why had he left it sealed in a locked box at home? Why had he not told Gabriel, the bank, the county clerk, either witness or his doctors? Why had Vivian hidden the destruction instead of reporting it at the reading? Most importantly, why had she waited until he was dead? Gabriel said the law would decide what evidence could be admitted. The court would decide what it meant. My job was not to predict the judge. My job was to keep the record clean. That was difficult when Vivian began attacking everything outside the record. Vivian could no longer control the documents, so she tried to control the audience. For a few days it worked. Then, Grandpa's final safeguard reached its intended destination. It was not hidden in a clock or buried beneath a floorboard. It arrived by registered mail from First County Bank, exactly 30 days after his death, because that was the delivery date he had selected. The envelope was addressed to Vivian, and the letter inside made clear that he had known what she was doing. The bank sent duplicate notices to Gabriel and Evelyn, so Vivian could not hide the letter. Grandpa had written it 6 weeks before his death and placed it in delayed delivery. He did not accuse her emotionally. He listed facts. He identified the false care invoices, the payments to Mark, and the Meridian option agreement. He explained that he had amended his estate plan to protect the land and company while still providing Vivian with a home and income. He asked her to give Gabriel a complete accounting before his death. If she did, he would treat the money as an advance against her future allowance and seek no further action. If she did not, the estate administrator would be instructed to recover every unauthorized payment. The final paragraph was personal. Grandpa wrote that love did not require blindness. He said he would not reward deception by surrendering the future of the orchard, but he hoped Vivian would choose honesty while there was still time to repair what she had damaged. He signed the letter in the same green ink used on the will and sealed it before a bank officer. Vivian had received a similar warning in person. The delayed letter existed so she could not later claim otherwise. Vivian read selected lines to the family, skipping the shell company and presenting Grandpa's offer of forgiveness as proof that the payments were authorized. Gabriel sent one factual notice stating that the estate was reviewing documented transactions under court supervision. Then I muted the group chat and let the records speak. Mark noticed first. He had signed the Meridian agreement as manager of the company that received the option payment. Bank records showed he transferred $60,000 to pay gambling debts and used the remainder as a down payment on a sports car. Vivian had told him the old will remained valid, and Grandpa's later plan was only an unsigned draft. She said the document in the study could be destroyed because it had never been witnessed. The certified copies proved she lied to him. The wildlife camera proved she could not place the entire cleanup on him without implicating herself. Mark hired a separate attorney. Within a week, that attorney contacted the estate and offered cooperation. Mark admitted helping Vivian remove the ashes and dispose of the bag. He claimed he did not see her light the fire, but she called him after I left and said I had caught her destroying the trust will. When he arrived, the document was still burning. She told him Grandpa wanted it gone and that cleaning the room was necessary to avoid a family scandal. He also surrendered the missing fireproof box. It was stored in a rented unit under his company name. The box was empty, except for Grandpa's red ledger, which Vivian had overlooked because it was tucked beneath a removable tray. The ledger confirmed the bank analysis. Beside each suspicious payment, Grandpa had written a question mark, the date, and Vivian's explanation. None matched the records. On the final written page, Grandpa noted that Vivian had asked him to sign a durable power of attorney with expanded real estate authority. He refused. The next day, she brought him a signature page she described as a pharmacy authorization. He did not sign it. He photographed it instead. The photographed page was part of a deed authorization prepared for the Meridian closing. That discovery expanded the investigation beyond the will. A handwriting examiner reviewed the signature on a second version filed with Meridian and concluded it was probably traced from an older document. Grandpa had never authorized Vivian to sell the land during his life or after his death. Her next attorney, Dana Holt, adopted a narrower strategy. Dana stopped defending the care invoices and land agreement. She argued that those disputes were separate from the will. Even if Vivian mishandled money, Dana said, Grandpa could still have instructed her orally to destroy the later document. The court should apply the 2009 will because the signed original could not be produced. It was the strongest argument left. But Grandpa's photographs showed the original secure in his study before he entered the hospital and never returned. Vivian controlled the house, took the box after his death, burned the document, concealed the remains, and lied about the cleanup. The 3 copies established the contents. Witnesses, a medical evaluation, and video established validity. The case was not simply about replacing a missing page, it was about proving who made it missing and when. Dana tried to exclude the contents of Grandpa's backup drive as hearsay. Gabriel responded that much of it consisted of business records, photographs, and contemporaneous observations relevant to his state of mind and the custody of the will. The judge reserved some questions for the hearing. Evidence law did not turn every truthful thing into admissible proof, and Gabriel refused to promise an easy victory. Vivian understood performance better than structure. At her deposition, she wore the brooch Grandpa gave my mother and cried before the first question ended. She described bathing him, feeding him, and sitting beside his bed every night. Lorna's logs showed she had been away during many of the dates she named. Credit card records placed her at a resort during one supposed medical crisis. Still, the emotion in the room was real enough to affect people. Then Gabriel asked her to describe the document Grandpa allegedly told her to destroy. Vivian said it was stapled in the upper left corner and printed on ordinary white office paper. The signed will had not been stapled. It was bound with blue ribbon, printed on cream archival stock, and sealed through every page. She had seen it in the fire, but she had never studied it before removing it from the box. Her invented description came from the unexecuted drafts Gabriel had mailed months earlier. Gabriel placed the 3 verified copies on the table, one at a time. The first came from his archive. The second came from the bank. The third came from the county clerk. Each showed the ribbon and seal. Each showed Grandpa's initials on every page. Each contradicted the document Vivian claimed he had described from his hospital bed. For the first time, She had no revised story ready. 2 weeks before the probate hearing, Gabriel invited the beneficiaries to view the execution video at his office. He was not legally required to hold a family screening, but he hoped seeing Grandpa speak for himself would reduce the pressure surrounding the case. Vivian declined. Several relatives attended, including 2 who had publicly accused me of manipulating him. The video began with a wide view of a conference room. A wall clock and calendar were visible. Grandpa sat between the 2 witnesses, wearing the navy jacket he kept for weddings and court appearances. Gabriel asked him to state his name, the date, the members of his immediate family, and the general nature of his property. Grandpa answered without hesitation. Then Gabriel asked why he wanted the Heritage Trust. Grandpa explained that the land had survived floods, debt, and a highway proposal because each generation treated it as something borrowed from the next. Rowan Restoration had grown from a 2-man carpentry shop into a regional company by teaching people to repair rather than replace. If the land went to one individual without restrictions, the pressure to sell would eventually win. He named me trustee because my work required patience with things that could not defend themselves. He said I had refused money when he offered it and asked for access to the mill archives instead. He also named 2 independent co-trustees so I could not act alone. There was no grand praise. Grandpa did not speak as though I were perfect. He said I avoided conflict until it became dangerous, took too much responsibility for other people's feelings, and would need help understanding business operations. Hearing those criticisms steadied me. Manipulated speeches flatter. Grandpa was leaving instructions. When Gabriel asked about Vivian, Grandpa looked down for several seconds. He said she was his daughter and he loved her. He believed fear about money had become entitlement, and entitlement had become dishonesty. He wanted her housed, insured, and safe. He did not want her controlling assets she had already promised to someone else. One relative began crying. Grandpa then described the Meridian option by name. He said he had not authorized it. He directed his representative to investigate the care payments and recover funds if Vivian refused to account. Finally, he stated that he understood the new will revoked every prior will and that no one had authority to destroy it on his behalf. The witnesses watched him initial each page. The camera showed the blue ribbon threaded through punched holes and the green seal applied over the binding. At the end, Grandpa held the completed document toward the lens, while Gabriel read the page count. There was no reasonable way to confuse it with stapled white paper. After the video, relatives who had attacked me began apologizing. One cousin provided screenshots showing Mark had circulated a draft public statement 3 days before Grandpa died. It claimed Vivian was the sole heir under a long-standing estate plan. They were preparing the story while he was still alive. Meridian also began protecting itself. The company terminated the option agreement for failure of authority and demanded return of its payment. Its internal emails, produced under subpoena, showed Vivian had assured executives that the later will would not survive the weekend. That message was sent the afternoon of the funeral, 7 hours before I found her in the study. Dana Holt asked the court to keep the email out, arguing the phrase could refer to a legal challenge. Gabriel responded that its meaning belonged with the other evidence, the fire, the cleanup, the box, the false statements, and Mark's testimony. The judge ruled that the email could be considered at the hearing, subject to foundation. Vivian tried one final private approach. She waited for me outside the archives where I worked. Her face looked smaller without the careful lighting and sympathetic posts. She said the family would never recover if I testified against her. She offered to abandon her challenge if I agreed to sell 20 acres, repay Meridian, and appoint Mark to Rowan Restoration's board. She described it as compromise. It was the original scheme with fewer acres. I told her every settlement proposal had to go through the attorneys. She reached for my arm, then stopped when she noticed the security camera above the entrance. Her eyes followed it, and I understood that the cameras bothered her more than people did. People could be pressured. Records could not be shamed. Before leaving, she said Grandpa would hate what I was doing to his daughter. That sentence stayed with me because it contained the oldest trap in our family. Vivian's choices became something done to her the moment anyone refused to absorb their consequences. Grandpa had spent years softening those consequences. He paid debts, overlooked lies, and gave her another chance because he believed love meant keeping the door open. His final estate plan kept the door open too. It gave her a home and income. It simply removed the keys to everyone else's future. The night before the hearing, I returned to the orchard with Evelyn's permission. Rowan House was dark except for a lamp in the front hall. The mill clock ticked unevenly, pausing before each hour as if gathering strength. I stood in the study and looked at the clean fireplace. The scorch marks were gone. The room smelled of stone polish instead of smoke. Yet I could still see Vivian's shoe over the fallen page and the orange edge folding through Grandpa's initials. For weeks, I had thought the case depended on saving what she burned. It did not. The will survived because Grandpa understood that preservation was not the same as hiding one precious object. Preservation meant copies, witnesses, context, and custody. It meant building a record strong enough that one person's fire could not decide the past. The next morning, I carried that lesson into court. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was no jury, no polished television drama, and no sudden witness bursting through the doors. There were fluorescent lights, wooden benches, stacks of labeled exhibits, and a judge who had already read hundreds of pages before any of us sat down. Vivian arrived in black with Grandpa's handkerchief folded in her purse. Dana Holt focused her argument on the missing original. She acknowledged that copies existed, but said a copy could not reveal Grandpa's final intent. Vivian claimed he changed his mind in the hospital and instructed her to destroy the later will. Dana asked the court to admit the uncontested 2009 document, or, at minimum, refuse the Heritage Trust until a full trial. Gabriel began with custody. The bank officer authenticated the second verified copy and Grandpa's delayed delivery letter. The county clerk authenticated the sealed third copy and the witness affidavits deposited with it. Gabriel's records manager described the first archived copy, the color standard, and the scan log. The two witnesses identified their signatures. Grandpa's neurologist testified that he understood his assets, family, and decisions when he signed. Then the execution video played. Grandpa's voice filled the courtroom. Vivian looked toward the screen only once. When he said no one had authority to destroy the will for him, she lowered her head and kept it there. I testified next. I described returning for the cedar box, seeing the fire, recognizing the binding, taking photographs, and being ordered out. Dana questioned my financial interest and my resentment toward Vivian. She asked why I had not physically pulled the pages from the flames if I truly believed they were Grandpa's will. The question hurt because I had asked myself the same thing. I explained that Vivian stood between me and the hearth holding metal tongs. I did not know whether she would strike me or throw the burning pages. I chose to create a record and call the lawyer. Dana suggested that taking pictures instead of rescuing the document was the behavior of someone preparing a lawsuit. I answered that I was a conservator. When damage could not safely be stopped, documentation came first. Owen authenticated the wildlife camera footage. Investigators described recovering the bag. The forensic examiner connected the fragments to the physical characteristics preserved in the copies without claiming more certainty than the science allowed. Mark testified that Vivian called the document the trust will and directed him to dispose of the ashes. His cooperation agreement was disclosed. Dana attacked his credibility by showing that he hoped to reduce his own exposure. Gabriel did not pretend Mark was noble. He used phone records, camera times, storage records, and messages to corroborate the parts of Mark's account that mattered. The Meridian email appeared on the courtroom screen. The later will not survive the weekend. Dana argued that Vivian meant the will would fail legally. Gabriel placed the email beside her message to Mark after I left the house. Elise saw me destroying the trust will. Come through the rear gate and bring heavy bags. Mark had not deleted the cloud backup. The defense shifted again. Dana suggested Vivian believed she was carrying out Grandpa's hospital instruction and concealed it only because she feared my reaction. Gabriel asked why she took the fireproof box before the scheduled reading, why she presented the 2009 will without disclosing the later one, and why she initially denied cleaning the fireplace. Vivian answered that grief affected her memory. Gabriel showed her the letter she received from Grandpa. She admitted reading his description of the Heritage Trust before his death. She admitted knowing Gabriel held copies. She admitted signing the Meridian option, though she denied understanding the authority clause. When asked why she told the developer the will would not survive, she said she meant the family would persuade me to abandon it. The judge asked the final question. If Vivian believed Grandpa had revoked the later will, why did she need me to abandon it? Vivian looked toward Dana. Dana could not answer for her. The ruling came after a recess that lasted less than an hour. The judge found clear and convincing evidence that Grandpa properly executed the later will while competent and free from undue influence. The 3 copies, execution video, witness testimony, and preservation records established its contents. The evidence also established that the original remained in Grandpa's locked box when he entered the hospital and was removed and burned after his death. Because Grandpa did not destroy the original and did not direct its destruction through any legally valid act, there was no revocation. Vivian's unsupported claim about a hospital instruction was inconsistent with the documents, her conduct, and her repeated false statements. The court admitted the later will to probate. It also permanently barred Vivian from serving as personal representative, continued the asset freeze, ordered a full surcharge proceeding over the unauthorized transactions, and referred the evidence concerning the forged deed authorization and destroyed document to the district attorney. Evelyn would remain administrator until the heritage trustees qualified. The judge did not deliver a speech about greed or family. She did something more damaging to Vivian. She read the findings into the record with dates, amounts, and exhibit numbers. The woman who had built her power through changing stories was reduced to facts she could not revise. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered around Gabriel. I walked past them. Vivian caught up near the elevator and asked whether I was happy now. I was not happy. Grandpa was still dead. The study still held scorch marks beneath fresh polish. Our family would never return to the version of itself that existed before the fire, if that version had ever been real. But I was no longer helpless inside her story. I told her the result was what Grandpa arranged, not what I invented. The elevator doors opened. She stood there waiting for me to offer comfort, soften the sentence, or promise to protect her from what came next. I stepped inside and let the doors close. The legal aftermath lasted almost a year. There was no single dramatic punishment, only a series of consequences arriving with the patience of accounts being reconciled. The surcharge proceeding found Vivian responsible for the false care payments, unauthorized transfers, investigation costs, and damage caused by the attempted land deal. The amount exceeded the value of the lifetime allowance Grandpa had created for her. After negotiated offsets and the sale of assets purchased with diverted funds, the estate recovered most of what had been taken. Vivian kept the right to occupy the gatehouse under strict conditions because Grandpa's will did not make housing dependent on obedience. The Heritage Trust could not rewrite his generosity simply because she abused it. But the monthly allowance was consumed by restitution for years, and she had no authority over the property, business, employees, or accounts. The criminal investigation ended in a plea. Vivian admitted to obstructing the probate process and using a false instrument connected to the proposed sale. She received supervised confinement, community service, and financial penalties. Mark pleaded to a lesser offense, returned the car purchased with Meridian's money, and completed a treatment program for gambling addiction. Some relatives called the outcome too harsh, others called it too gentle. I stopped measuring justice by whether everyone felt satisfied. The useful question was whether the land was protected, the money was accounted for, and the record told the truth. Rowan Restoration survived the conflict. The board added 2 independent directors and stronger controls around related party payments. I did not take an executive position. Grandpa had been right that preservation work did not automatically make me qualified to run a construction company. I served as one of 3 heritage trustees and hired people who understood finance, land management, and apprenticeship programs. That decision disappointed relatives who assumed the fight had been about obtaining a title. It also reassured employees who feared I would treat Grandpa's business like a personal inheritance. The old mill opened as a training center the following spring. Retired craftspeople taught masonry repair, timber framing, plaster conservation, and window restoration. Lorna helped design an accessible workshop for older volunteers. Owen managed the orchard and planted a row of disease-resistant apple trees along the road. A local school used the archive room for a history project about the Greywater flood. We placed Grandpa's drafting table beneath the north windows. Above it hung a framed reproduction of the first page of the will. I argued against displaying the burned fragments. They were evidence of Vivian's act, but I did not want her destruction to become the center of Grandpa's legacy. The fragments remained in the estate archive inside a conservation enclosure, accompanied by the photographs, custody record, and court order. Future researchers would be able to understand what happened without mistaking damage for the whole story. Some relatives repaired the harm they caused through retractions and repeated acts. Others continued saying I should have settled privately. I wished them well from a distance. Vivian attended none of the opening events. Years later, she asked whether the trust might sell a parcel near the highway for her benefit. I told her the land was not for sale. Protecting it was not winning. It was the job. That evening, I walked through Rowan House and wound the mill clock. Its backup compartment was empty now, but I kept Grandpa's index card there. The uneven ticking filled the hall, followed by the deep chime of the hour. For most of my life, I believed an original object carried a truth no copy could match. In conservation, originals matter. They hold fibers, pressure marks, repairs, stains, and the physical evidence of the hands that made them. Watching Grandpa's will burn felt like watching his final voice disappear. Vivian believed that too. She believed one original meant one point of failure. Destroy the paper, remove the hard drive, empty the box, and the past could be replaced with whichever story she told first. Grandpa understood something larger. He kept 3 copies, but he also kept witnesses. He preserved bank records, medical evaluations, photographs, dates, and a video in which he explained his choices. He placed authority in a trust shared by several people. He designed his wishes to survive not because he distrusted paper, but because he understood people. The fire destroyed the signed sheets in his study. It did not destroy his intent. It did not erase the orchard, the apprentices in the mill, my mother's photograph returned to the desk, or the names written into the family trusts. It did not turn Vivian's old will into his final choice. It did not make her first story true. On the anniversary of the hearing, Gabriel delivered the estate archive to the new records room. The first box contained the law firm's verified copy. The second held the bank copy. The third held the sealed county copy, now released under court order. We stored them in separate, secure locations, following the plan Grandpa approved. I kept no copy at home. I did not need to. Every time the mill doors opened, every time an apprentice learned to save a window someone else would have thrown away, and every spring the orchard bloomed without survey flags cutting it into lots, Grandpa's decision existed in the world. My aunt had burned the original will because she believed inheritance belonged to whoever controlled the last piece of paper. She never understood that Grandpa had already made his legacy too large for one fire.